During his governorship in Cilicia around 51 BCE, Cicero found himself with more than just the spoils of a minor military victory. He had prisoners of war, and instead of holding them or sending them home, Cicero did what many Romans did. He sold them. These captives were auctioned off, fetching around 120,000 sesterces, a sum worth over 130 years of a Roman soldier's salary. But Cicero's actions were far from unique. After wars, Roman generals regularly returned with thousands of enslaved captives. For example, following the devastating Third Punic War, 50,000 survivors were forced into slavery. They were paraded, inspected, and sold in vast public slave markets to the highest bidders, treated as mere commodities. Welcome to Binge History. Today, we examine the chilling world of the Roman slave markets. Roman slaves came from nearly every corner of the known world, sourced through Rome's relentless military conquests, piracy, and even debt. War captives, known as captivi, made up the largest source, with entire communities uprooted and transported to Roman markets, providing a constant influx of fresh labor. This process was systematic. Rome's war machine fed the slave market, integrating foreign captives into their social and economic fabric. Furthermore, people could be sold into slavery to pay off debts, abandoned as children and raised in servitude, or born into slavery. At its peak, up to a third of Rome's population was enslaved, with some estimates suggesting as many as 10 million people. Roman slave markets weren't hidden away in dingy corners. They were highly visible, often set in prominent locations like the Forum in Rome or the notorious slave port of Delos, where up to 10,000 slaves could be sold in a single day. One such marketplace, the Greco Stadium, sat behind the Basilica Julia in the heart of Rome. The entire operation was regulated by Roman authorities, with officials such as city magistrates in Rome and quaestors in other parts of the empire. In this system, traders, known as venalici, acquired slaves from various sources, such as military conquests, and prepared them for sale. They often inspected each slave and enhanced their appearance to increase appeal. Before reaching the auction stage, these traders typically sold slaves to sellers, or mango, who managed the public auction and were legally liable for any undisclosed defects to final buyers, such as wealthy landowners. This transaction could occur privately or in the marketplace, depending on the circumstances. Sellers acted as intermediaries, presenting the slaves to maximize their appeal to potential buyers. The auctioneer, often a praeco, hosted the bidding process, while aedile or quaestors oversaw the sales to ensure fairness and legality. Roman law required both traders and sellers to disclose any known defects in the slaves they sold. If a trader failed to reveal significant defects, they could be held accountable for misleading the seller and face legal consequences. Similarly, if a seller withheld information from the buyer and undisclosed flaws were found within 6 months of purchase, the buyer could invoke actio redhibitoria, a legal remedy allowing them to rescind the sale and receive a refund, even if the seller was unaware of the defect. This strict regulation compelled both traders and sellers to thoroughly inspect each slave's health. Despite these regulations, traders and sellers were not entirely trusted. Many Romans viewed them with suspicion, often comparing them to pimps. Before auctions, slaves were held in wooden pens or iron cages, dressed up, painted to hide scars and wounds, and sometimes even fattened, all to make them more appealing to buyers. Each slave wore a titulus, a placard around their neck detailing their origin, skills, health status, and any known defects. For example, a titulus might read, "From Gaul, skilled in agriculture, but has a limp." Buyers wanted full transparency, or at least as much as the traders were willing to offer. Think of it as a twisted talent show. Slaves weren't just bought for brute strength. Wealthy landowners, merchants, and tradespeople alike crowded the markets, each seeking slaves for their own needs. Wealthy aristocrats might bid on educated Greeks to serve as tutors, while tradespeople like bakers and blacksmiths sought skilled laborers to support their businesses. When it was time to sell, the process was anything but subtle. For the Romans, purchasing a slave was much like selecting livestock, with a try before you buy attitude. Slaves were lined up on platforms or even revolving stands, usually displayed in minimal clothing to give buyers a clear view of their physical condition. Potential buyers could inspect every aspect of their physique, checking their teeth, poking and prodding to assess health and strength. Sometimes, slaves were even asked to leap or perform physical tasks to demonstrate their capabilities. One crucial detail on the placard around each slave's neck was their place of origin, as certain regions were thought to produce more desirable slaves. For example, Marcus Terentius Varro, a prominent author and agricultural writer, recommended Gauls as ideal herdsmen, while advising against Tertullians for the same role. The poet Martial, fantasizing about his ideal boy toy, preferred a boy from Egypt, drawn by Egypt's reputation for sensuality. Even Cicero joked in a letter to his friend Atticus that British captives wouldn't be learned in literature or music, reflecting the Roman view of Britons as uncultured. Once all slaves were displayed and inspected, the auction began. Bidders would raise their hands or shout offers until a buyer was found willing to pay the highest price for each slave. Prices varied significantly based on age, skills, and perceived value. Skilled slaves could sell for up to 12 times more than unskilled ones. A young male who looked fit for the arena might be marketed as a future gladiator, while a refined woman could be sold as an exotic beauty, ideal for noble households. Gladiators were particularly prized. Captured warriors or slaves trained for combat were sold at premium prices to meet the public's thirst for violent entertainment. However, slaves of exceptional beauty or rarity were not displayed in the public market. Instead, they were shown privately to select buyers, away from the common crowds. Interestingly, many of Rome's educated and skilled slaves were Greeks, as they were highly regarded for their intellect and artistry. These individuals fetched the highest prices and were often employed in more refined roles compared to those bought for physical labor. In fact, owning an educated Greek tutor or a highly skilled artisan could elevate a Roman social standing, displaying not just wealth but a taste for the exotic and sophisticated. Acting as intermediaries, auctioneers sometimes exaggerated these slaves' abilities to drive up prices, making a sale more lucrative. However, slave prices could be volatile. After significant military campaigns, the influx of captives drove prices down as supply outpaced demand. But during quieter times when fresh slaves were scarce, prices surged. Traders closely watched these market conditions to maximize profits, always ready to exploit scarcity or surplus. After a successful bid, the slave was sold to the highest bidder. The transaction was recorded officially, and payment was exchanged. Each sale was documented with a bill of sale, meaning that every transaction involving the purchase of a slave was recorded with an official document, similar to a modern receipt or contract. The treatment of newly purchased slaves depended on their owner's wealth and personality. Some found relatively comfortable domestic roles, but many faced brutal conditions in mines or fields, where they were often worked to death. For rebellious slaves, punishment was severe, and they were sometimes forced to wear punishment collars, inscribed with messages like, "Hold me and return me." Despite the harsh conditions, some slaves did manage to earn their freedom through a process called manumission. Slaves could be set free as a reward for loyal service, or simply because their owners no longer wanted the responsibility. Freed slaves could even become citizens, though they still carried the social stigma of once having been property. But manumission was also a smart economic move. Freed slaves often remained financially tied to their former owners, required to pay a portion of their income. This setup allowed owners to keep a loyal workforce without the cost of upkeep, So, yes, they were free, but still bound to their past. A reminder that freedom in ancient Rome always came with strings attached. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more captivating history stories on Binge History.